Hi, my name is Matt, and I produce the videos for this channel, Varsity Bookworm. What you're about to see is the first in a series of interviews that I conducted with a man named Sawyer and a woman named Kathy, two contemporary believers in the teachings of Heaven's Gate, one of the most controversial religious movements in recent history. Before jumping in, I wanted to say a few things about what this work is, why I'm doing it, and what I hope you might gain from it. For starters, I am currently an undergraduate student studying in philosophy, and as such, my interest in the history, practices, and beliefs of Heaven's Gate is purely an academic interest. I enjoy analyzing and explaining other people's ideas. Actually, if I'm being honest, I think I enjoy talking about other people's philosophies much more than talking about my own. There are two major reasons why I enjoy doing this kind of work. The first being that it allows me to exercise some of the skills that I'm being trained in. For example, being able to set aside one's own prejudices and preconceived ideas in order to critically but open-mindedly evaluate somebody else's sets of beliefs. The second reason is I find that whenever I spend time with someone else's ideas, I am encouraged, challenged to take that into other areas of my life. Maybe not necessarily the ideas themselves, but just the practice of trying to see the world through someone else's point of view. I might not always agree with someone else's perspective, but I find it much easier to tolerate perspectives that I don't happen to share if I've spent some time trying to at least understand them. Now, when I first began to research and write about Heaven's Gate specifically, I really wanted to understand how so many people could subscribe to such an eclectic set of beliefs, and also how so many people could be convinced that they should undertake certain extreme practices, certain unusual practices, and ultimately fatal practices. When I learned that there were still people out there who currently subscribe to the Heaven's Gate philosophy, I seized upon the first opportunity I could to speak with them directly. That's how I came in contact with Sawyer and Kathy. Sawyer is a lifelong believer in Heaven's Gate. In fact, he was one of the first people to join the movement back in the early 70s. He left the group in the early 90s following a kind of personal crisis, and so that's why he is still alive today, whereas the group that was present with their leader in 1997 is not. A few years after the group's final act, Sawyer found himself recommitting to the Heaven's Gate belief system, and it's something that he is very committed to this day. Kathy, on the other hand, is a relatively recent convert, if you will, to the Heaven's Gate ideology. Ironically, she was first introduced to Heaven's Gate through a documentary which was almost certainly meant to portray Heaven's Gate in a negative light, but it had the opposite effect on her. She actually became very interested and eventually persuaded by the Heaven's Gate teachings. Sawyer and Kathy met up 4 or 5 years ago, and they've been together ever since. Now, as far as this first interview is concerned, the main topic basically revolves around an event that Kathy and Sawyer had participated in the day before the interview was filmed. That event was titled Heaven's Gate Reexamined. It was facilitated by Ryan and Chloe Graveface of the Graveface Museum, which is a really, really awesome, really interesting establishment in Savannah, Georgia. Essentially, Graveface is a murder, true crime, paranormal horror museum. Much of the day's events took place at another property owned by the Gravefaces called the Lodge of Sorrows. We saw Q&As, films, and a live musical performance by Sawyer. There was roughly 24 in attendance at the start of the event. By the end of the event, it was myself and one other person. We stayed the whole time. And if you're watching this, you know who you are. Sawyer and Kathy warned me when we sat down. They said, hey, we're just letting you know, we love to talk about what we believe. And we'll talk for a long time. And I told them that's fine with me because I love to listen to what other people believe. Like I said, I like doing that more than I like talking about what I believe. So I think it was a good match. With all that said, I just want to share a couple of quick disclaimers. First of all, I want to let you know that some of the topics discussed in these interviews may be disturbing to some people. The topic of cults and the topic of suicide are discussed at various points, so just a heads up. Second, my decision to interview these individuals and publish this material on my channel should not be interpreted as an endorsement of their views or the views of any other Heaven's Gate members, whether past, present, or future. My aim here is essentially to allow these two people to tell their side of the story, to tell their side of a very complicated and challenging story. I want to thank Sawyer and Kathy and everyone else that I met at the event, and I'm really excited to share this content with my audience and with anyone else who's interested in this complicated, fascinating subject. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.